Hi, everybody. This is Lisa Kessler with Kessler Insurance, and I am here today on behalf of Cheers for Charity New Hampshire, and I am here today with my dear friend Joanne. Hey, Joanne.
Lisa. Hi, I'm Joanne Burchuk. I'm with Lighthouse Physical Therapy, and today we have another great guest with us on our Cheers for Charity group here. I'd like to welcome Julia Dundorf from the Grassroots Fund. And welcome, Julia. Please take a minute, just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what your organization does.
Sure. It's such a pleasure to be here and to be speaking with you both today. I am Julia Dundorf. I live here in the seacoast of New Hampshire. I've been with the Grassroots Fund for over a decade. I think it's about 12 years now. And we are based, or have been based, in Newmarket, New Hampshire. We're pretty virtual at this point, coming out of the pandemic, and we remain so, but we maintain a small office in Newmarket. We are what's known as a 501c3 public foundation. We are not endowed, so we raise our funds each year in order to get resources deeply into communities working on environmental justice types of projects. And that's across the 6 New England states. So we were founded, about 27 years ago by philanthropy in order to have a mechanism to accept applications and to work with groups that are much smaller than typically come to foundations. We're often the first funds that a group will receive. Often our applicants have never written a proposal. They might not have ever put together a budget for a foundation. And the other thing that is unique about us and why we were formed by philanthropy is we fund groups that do not have tax exempt status directly. So they can come to us as we used to call them kitchen table groups, a group of neighbors coming together. And a perfect example of the kind of groups that we support came out of the pandemic. And folks coming together, realizing there were needs in their communities, real urgency. And we were able to fund, for instance, those kind of helping neighbor type groups. We call it mutual aid kind of work really rapidly. So we have about 350, much higher during the pandemic, grantees each year from across the 6 New England states. And these are groups, as I mentioned, that often have no budget. They're just getting off the ground. And that's why we work closely with foundation partners that support our work, because we're helping to kind of catalyze early work and groups experimenting, feeling like they have the freedom to explore an idea for solving a problem in their community or dealing with an urgency. And then we're supported by hundreds of individual donors each year as well. And we're intentionally non-endowed because we get the funds right out the door as opposed to holding funds in an investment. So that's part of our theory of change. So that's a little bit about us, and we're funding groups that are doing everything from food justice and food access kinds of work to climate change and renewable and sustainable energy type projects looking at land and water issues, something called new economy kind of work, like how do you rethink what binds and supports healthy and just communities. And we're really based on issues of equity and justice, of who is left out of resources. And also, I think, and this is a bit of a shift that we've made over the past 6 or 7 years, is as we're rooting deeper and deeper into environmental justice, that requires us to think about who is making decisions in everything that we do. So another thing that makes us very unique, and an invitation to those who might watch this after, is we have we have ceded the decision-making of how our funds are distributed to the communities. So we have a pretty unique participatory grant-making process. We have hundreds of people each year as readers. So anybody can review applications, and we let them know how much time, and people can say how many they want to pitch in on. And nobody sees each other's scores, and all these folks, and we have youth doing it, people from really diverse backgrounds, folks with no experience doing philanthropy, reviewing applications. And then our staff does a review and talks to all the applicants. but we don't make any decisions. And then the final decision-making of our fund distribution comes down to a grant-making committee that are made up of folks that are doing this work on the ground. And but they're able to base those decisions on all that input, on all that community experience and lived experience across race and gender and orientation and geography. So it's actually a rich community of input. So that's something that is pretty unique and builds the very nature of the application process is actually building community and giving people ideas for other kinds of projects they might do and building awareness across the region. So you might be from Northern New Hampshire reviewing an application in New Haven, Connecticut. And so that also is part of that binding together that we're looking to do.
That's amazing. And I love the fact that the community is involved in this decision making, and you're kind of pulling things in from all different areas. And you said, and this is a regional group. So, we're talking, there was 6 states that are all part of your fund. How do people get started and how do they find you?
A lot of different ways. And actually, that's something that's really changed again over the past few years as we went into this deeper participatory process. What happens is people that take part in the process, whether they're readers or grant making committee members or even applicants and grantees, almost become ambassadors of this collective work. So what we've seen, and it is part of why we need to really keep pushing on the fundraising, is folks reach out and say, you need to hear about the Grassroots Fund because they're doing really interesting work. And we think that might align with what you're doing. So we've had to do less and less of although we still reach out every time we have grant rounds coming up, we have to do that less and less because we see people sharing we call them readers who read applications. They're sharing that out. They're sharing out the application process as well. And that it kind of starts perpetuating. And I think one of the things that we found, particularly working in BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, where they might not have seen themselves reflected in the old traditional environmental movement, which was, started particularly by white folks, they're starting to see that their work is part of that broad spectrum of what makes environmental justice, of what makes communities healthy, resilient, just, and a quality of life that we want to see. And those are things that are increasingly important as we're seeing the escalating impacts of climate change. Right now, what's going on in Vermont and parts of New Hampshire with the flooding, the resilience of communities and community fabric and connections are going to only become increasingly important. And coming back around to your question, that's how the word gets out there. Our grants are small, but they often are that kind of catalyzing funding that helps groups get going. And we don't have any limit on how many times a group can come back to us. We have limits on how many times they can come a year, but not, we have some groups we've been funding for 15 years.
And what is that amount? What's a typical grant?
So we have 3, not to get too wonky, but we have 3 different grant levels. We have something called the Seed Grant Program. It's a rolling deadline. So we're reviewing applications through the year. There's no deadline. That uses a slightly different participatory process than what I explained because we try to do it a bit more rapidly. But again, the decisions are made by the community. And those are up to $1,000 right now. So they're just like, quick, get the project off the ground. Then we have our Grow grant level. And that is the one I kind of explained the process for. And that's up to $4,000. There's 2 deadlines a year for that in March and September. And all this is on our website, grassrootsfund.org. And then we actually are experimenting with another grant program. This will get really wonky, so I'll just touch on it, which is shared gifting circles. And we're doing one project on climate resilience in the Boston area, and then a food system resilience fund. And that is building a pot of money and having it cohort based, where there's usually 12 to 15 in our model groups, and we pick from across the states that are doing that work really deeply in their communities. And they have that pot of money to work together to build relationship over the course of a year. And they decide how those funds will get distributed amongst themselves. And so that is further dismantling that kind of power dynamic of that it exists in philanthropy, and really saying, you know best what you need, and providing the framework, enough of a framework, and the, of course, legal and financial structures to distribute those funds, and they make the decisions amongst themselves. And one might be skeptical of, like, really, how does that work if, you have the pot of money and I'm going to say I need as much as I could get, and but that's not what ends up happening, because there's the relationship building, and the groups talk about what their needs are, and they say, you know what, I could use $5,000 less because I hear that you're launching a new program and you might need a little bit more funds. So that's our other grant level, and those are much higher levels. But our two, seed and grow, are what I mentioned first.
Well, such a great way to get these groups to be interactive, cooperatively, and probably helping to, pass on valuable information and share resources amongst themselves in other ways other than monetary ways, but really help support each other. What a great way
to I'm glad you mentioned that, Joanne. Actually, one of the things they tell us, because we've done now a full round, is that the money is good and helpful, but one of the most important parts of being part of that kind of a cohort base is that connection to other groups, and the time to pause and work on issues together, and how they're interacting after the round or outside of those meetings, and counting on each other. And actually, we're seeing groups talking about shared projects across that might not have known each other before, or even shared fundraising efforts, which is we also try to open doors to funding beyond our own funding. And so that is a huge, it comes back to community connections. The more we can link this kind of work and it's hard work. These are, I should have said at the beginning, these are largely all volunteer groups. I mean, this is really, really hard work, as I'm sure you know from doing this project.
Well, this part's easy for us. We love meeting all the people that are have their boots on the ground and out there making things happen. It's great. And how many groups a year are you funding, and what kind of budget dollars are you putting out there every year?
So we are we have about 300 to 350 applications each year, actually grants each year. And we, of course, had big spikes through the pandemic, but we're at our highest level of grant making we've ever seen. And I'm just pulling up a quick budget to be good and accurate with you. So this year we're looking at, give me 1 second, matching pretty much last year, which was, again, our biggest level of all time. Sorry, are you going to be able to edit this?
Oh yeah, that's all right. You can say roughly. I was just kind of curious, as so many people are impacted.
Yeah. And sorry, so last year we put out about $1.3 million in small grants. So you can see that the volume, and of course the gifting circles are a little bigger. And this year we're shooting for $1.5 million, so a bit higher in grant making alone. The other piece of our work that we do, that's part of our typically, is a lot of convening work. That, of course, had to take a real pause during the pandemic, and we're still looking at ramping up for that. But these were different kinds of trainings and convenings that bring all this beautiful, rich network of groups together so they can learn from one another. The trainers are usually the people working on the ground, as opposed to external trainers coming in. And that has, we're really looking forward to getting back to that, including things, we developed these pop-up offices where staff would go out on the road and we'd set up in a public library or some sort of a community space that was very accessible and safe to people, that they felt like they could come out and talk about these issues. And those are really, really fun. And we were just ramping those up in March of 2020. So we'll be getting back to those as well. But at this point, we have a network of thousands of these grassroots groups. And that gives me a lot of hope. Gives me, that's when the days are hard or the news is bad. Knowing that there's so many people, amazing people on the ground doing this kind of interconnected work is pretty powerful. And every movement, every great movement, civil rights, environmental movement, it comes from the bottom. It bubbles up. And so that's really exciting to us.
You're going to go, Joe?
Yep, you go.
This is fantastic stuff. So there's tons of good information, it sounds like. You mentioned your website. Are there other ways for them to find out more about you? Do you use other social media sites? Or do you ever do workshops? Sort of what's the engagement piece?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think the best way is to go to our website at grassrootsfund.org, and there's a link, a very prominent place where you can sign up for our e-newsletter. We don't send out a lot of them, and it's a monthly bulletin. That's where we put in the announcements for upcoming calls for readers, calls for applications for our grant rounds, news that we're hearing from the ground. So I think that's really the best way to get in touch with us. We're, of course, on Facebook and Instagram, but I think that bulletin is where folks will get the most rich and most timely information of how they can get involved. And again, all are welcome to be readers of applications. It's a pretty powerful experience. And we're actually, a fun thing we're seeing is some folks are starting to put it in their LinkedIn bios or in their CVs that they've been grant reviewers. Like, what a powerful thing, particularly perhaps for folks, younger folks or people in transitioning careers, to have that kind of experience as well. So that's kind of fun to see.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity.
Very cool.
Taking notes.
I'm just taking notes.
Yeah.
I'm always taking notes. I love this.
Yeah.
Fantastic. What would be the one thing that you wish people knew about the Grassroots Fund?
Well, that we exist, that we're based here in New Hampshire. We were started and founded in Vermont, but one of the core founders actually was New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. So right here in New Hampshire. So I think knowing that we exist, knowing that there's a place for everybody to help decide how funds are distributed in our community, and to explore that with us, I think is what I'd love people to hear. And also we have a map that you can get to on our homepage. It's interactive, so you can filter on it. So that is really fun to hone in on the map. Maybe it's where you grew up, maybe it's where you live, and you can see the grantees and you can get contact information. You can see the kind of different work happening. So there's these on the map, there's thousands of these little bubbles, and you click on them and you can see the different groups that are doing work across the region. And it's such a spectrum of work that people are doing. So those are two.
I took a look at the map before I got on, and it is kind of cool because it's like, oh, there's a Madbury, Lee, Durham, which is our community. Some things going on there.
Exactly.
So that was.
And maybe
neat.
folks will see a group they think should be on there is not, and they get in touch and let them know about our resources.
And do you guys have any upcoming events that we should be aware of?
Not right. Well, the fall round will be in September. So that's the big push that will be starting to in mid-August. I know it's hard to think about September, but we'll be putting out the call for readers and for the next grant round. But that's we don't have any events right now other than that. So that's what we're hoping folks will look toward. And to sign up for that newsletter so you stay in touch with what's happening.
Perfect. Great. Perfect. Julia, this is awesome. Thank you so much for spending all this time with us today. We loved learning about the Grassroots Fund. I think what you do is so cool. I had no idea. And I think people will really enjoy hearing more about this cool support of these kitchen groups or these neat little neighbors, helping neighbors kinds of opportunities. So thank you for all you do, and thank you for sharing.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, Lisa and Joanne. Thanks for inviting us to chat today.